professor at Georgetown University. He's well known as one of the half-dozen leading South Asian scholars in the United States, indeed in the Western world. It's not just his 12 books and numerous articles, but the fact that he has conducted research in China, Britain, India, Pakistan, the Soviet Union, Japan, been a visiting professor at Tokyo University and at the Andhra University in India, and has served in the State Department with the policy planning staff on South Asian matters, and is a member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on International Security and Arms Control. So he brings an extraordinarily rich background to this session to talk about the regional implications of the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we're delighted to have you, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you. I knew Joe Jordan when he was a colonel, which tells you how old I am. And I really have fond memories of then Colonel Jordan's work at the U.S. Military Academy, because I was a student myself of the armed forces, role of the military. We had a common friend in Morris Janowitz, who was the founder of the whole field of military sociology in the United States. So I'm honored to be here, and the Wheatley Institution has invited me, and that I have a son up the road also who teaches at University of Utah. Made it a double pleasure to come to Provo today. Let me first of all associate myself with John Hamre's remarks. In Washington, some
Can
of
everybody
us,
hear?
Is it clear?
Yes.
In Washington, some of us are born Afghans, some of us go to Afghanistan, and the rest have Afghanistan thrust upon us. And day and night, night and day, for the past 2 years or so, I've been involved in conferences and workshops on Afghanistan and Pakistan. Pakistan is my specialty, not Afghanistan. But I've not heard a clearer statement of the dilemmas and the problems and the opportunities than John Hamre's just presented. So I'd like to associate myself with your views. And that you don't have any clear answers is part of the solution. That those who do have strong answers have in some ways got us down the wrong road. I'd like to sort of present a view from 30,000 feet, flying over South Asia, beginning Afghanistan, but really going to Pakistan, and looking not just at the next couple of weeks or couple of months, although I agree with you that the next year and a half is absolutely critical, but the long-term prospects, especially for Pakistan. I'm writing a book about the Indian military, but I'm spending 110% of my time on Pakistan, and I finished a book on Pakistan. I'm going to come back to it soon. Let me say a few words about Afghanistan, and perhaps build on something John Hamre just mentioned, because I think it is critical, and the morning panel didn't quite capture it. We're in Afghanistan not because of democratization. I think the Obama administration wisely abandoned that as a formal statement, but we're there because of a raging Islamic insurgency which could infect a whole range of countries, but particularly Pakistan. And I think it's the blowback on Pakistan that has larger strategic consequences for the United States. And I'll talk about this later, but as John Hamre said, Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state. I was unaware that it was building more nuclear weapons than anybody else, which doesn't encourage me either. So I think that clearly from a strategic perspective, we do have important interest in Afghanistan. Not to turn it into a democracy, although there's important members of Congress who are deeply concerned about the whole issue of women's rights in Afghanistan. And I know that some senators who are under pressure, liberal senators, under pressure from their constituents, half of their constituents don't want to fight a war, the other half want to protect women in Afghanistan. So you can just figure out the names of the California senators who are divided by this issue. And I had the good opportunity to be at a workshop at a remote place near Washington, D.C., where we met with 25 congressional staffers. And they reflected the concern of their bosses about Afghanistan, more so Afghanistan than Pakistan. We spent 80% of our time talking about Afghanistan, 20% talking about Pakistan. And their consensus was, and this is, I think, informed Beltway opinion, that we had to be in Afghanistan, but that the president had to tell us why. And this was generally their advice to their bosses. Afghanistan is important for a range of strategic reasons, for ideological reasons, the fact that we don't want to cut and run and, in a sense, leave the Afghans into the lurch. But also, we've got to explain this to the American people in terms that Americans can understand. When Obama gave his first policy address, he emphasized that Afghanistan might become a haven for al-Qaeda. That's a clear, identifiable enemy. But so might a lot of other countries around the world. Sudan, a whole bunch of other failed states or failing states could become a haven for al-Qaeda. So why Afghanistan? Why is that particularly important? I think the President has to come up with a statement which is understandable by the American people. I certainly agree with the characterization of the McChrystal Report. If you read it, it's a very fine report. It's not grand strategy, but addressed to the problem, it does the job well. As I read it, there are 4 factors: numbers of American forces, a correct American strategy, counterinsurgency as opposed to counterterrorism, the development of an Afghan army, and the development of a coherent government in Kabul. And it's up to Obama to shape those 4 factors. He can easily order more troops there, but unless they have the right strategy, and I think the U.S. Army has the right strategy, they won't work. But they also have to have the increasing support of an Afghan army, and of course a Kabul government with political institutions in Kabul, which makes sense to the Afghan people. Let me go back to I think to me what is one of the critical points of Afghanistan, and that is looking ahead. And I'm writing a book about the future of Pakistan, so this is part of that project. 4 or 5 years from now, maybe 2 years from now, if we pull out of Afghanistan, the most likely outcome would be a revival of the axis of the Northern Alliance, this group of non-Pashtun leaders supported by the Indians and the Iranians, to some extent the Russians, versus the Taliban, Pashtun-dominated Taliban. Pashtun, not all Pashtuns are Taliban, but all Taliban are Pashtuns, except in Pakistan. I'll come to that in a minute. So I think that you'd like to see a revival of essentially a civil war in Afghanistan. The Pakistanis, having supported the Taliban to victory, if we pull out, would then want to back them against the Indians. The Indians will support the so-called Northern Alliance, as will the Iranians and perhaps other countries. So in other words, another 5-10 years of struggle for Afghanistan. Of course, that destroys many times over an already destroyed Afghanistan society. But more importantly, in terms of strategic implications for the United States, and I look at this from an American perspective, I think there would be blowback from a raging civil war in Afghanistan with the Taliban on one side and a Northern Alliance kind of unit on the other side in Pakistan. That is, the Pakistanis will find it hard to both support the Taliban and eliminate the Taliban in their own country. And so I think that the critical strategic factor for me for Afghanistan is not only the fact that it might be taken over by al-Qaeda, and I think the Pakistanis would guarantee that it would not be, but the Talibanization of Pakistan, the increasing Talibanization of Pakistan. Let me talk about Pakistan, and I won't give you the Wikipedia version of it. I'll just give you even more Wikipedia than Wikipedia. You know, this is a country of 175 million people. It was the first state founded, like Israel, being a Jewish state, the first state founded to be an Islamic state. It broke apart in 1970 because of its own incompetence and Indian intervention. And from that point onward, the Pakistan army has been paranoid about the Indians breaking up what remains of Pakistan. Even paranoids can have enemies. It's always been a marginal democracy. Only about 40% of its history has it been, you could even call it a democracy. And even those democracies really had the military in the back room calling the shots. 60% of the time of Pakistan's history, 60-year history, it's been overt military rule. Often incompetent, and I think that's one of the tragedies of Pakistan and the Pakistan army, that the military have not governed Pakistan effectively. It's been a marginal ally of the United States from about the 1950s, and marginal in a sense that we used Pakistan for our purposes and they used us for their purposes. We didn't really have any common goals to speak of except to deter Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and a takeover of Pakistan. Eventually the Pakistanis defected, and they were the first to normalize with China. After they normalized with China, we normalized with China. Pakistan became a nuclear weapon state while I was in the State Department, in fact, in the 1980s, and I thought that was a momentous event. And I will say that the Reagan administration, of which I served, really looked the other way during that whole period. And that led the Pakistanis to conclude that we approved their nuclear weapons program. In a sense, they got the wrong conclusion out of our policy. And finally, Pakistan has been in a series of crises with India. I wrote a book about it with an Indian and a Pakistani friend, and we counted about 15 or 20 crises, 4 major ones in the last 15 years, 3 of which were nuclear, 3 of which involved either the threat of nuclear weapons or the suspicion that nuclear weapons might be used, or talk about escalation ladder up to the use of nuclear weapons, or the movement of nuclear weapons by Pakistani forces, one or the other. So the prospect of another crisis remains, and the factors which created some of those crises are still there. Finally, I'd say that Pakistan, at Brookings, we like to talk about globalization. You know, Mr. Hamry's CSIS and Brookings are sort of friendly rivals, and I'd say you're more conservative than we are. We tend to look at the bright sunny side of things. So we talk about globalization as being a good thing. But I've always argued around Brookings that globalization has an underside, a dark underside. And Pakistan was hit full force by that dark underside of globalization. Globalization, in shorthand, means the rapid movement of people, ideas, and goods around the world. Whether it's by container ship or Boeing jets or the internet, you move things around very quickly. And a lot of those things are very good. I can listen at home in Washington to radio stations in Moscow and China and India and Pakistan and all over the place. In a sense, we're all globalized, and it's a nice thing to be able to get on a plane here, or Salt Lake City, fly abroad, and it's good. But the bad guys take advantage of it also. One of the best utilizers of the internet have been various terrorist groups who use it to network and actually amplify their voice around the world. And I think of all the countries in the world I can think of, Pakistan was probably the most hit by negative globalization. It received the Islamist revival full force. That is, extreme radical Islamic ideas were eagerly promulgated in Pakistan through the internet, and through Pakistan now has something like 60 television stations. People came back and forth freely from Pakistan, and the British report that something like 50 or 60% of terrorist attacks in Britain originate in Pakistan. So there's a general movement by air, of course, of Pakistanis from Pakistani cities to British cities, traveling at will, although there's a security system established, but this is another negative aspect of globalization. Also, I think that Pakistanis who tend to be grievance prone, you know, a lot of nationalities cherish grievances. They look around the world and they see oppression of Muslims or you know, in Bosnia, Palestine, and other places, and they take it to heart. So every television broadcast that comes out of the Middle East is seen by many Pakistanis as an affront to them. And most Pakistanis are convinced that America is ahead. America and India are part of a larger global strategic war against Islam. So the jihadists have a popular audience in Pakistan, and I think a lot of this is the result of globalization. Globalization in Pakistan has also had another impact in the rise of the media in Pakistan. And my theory is that because it's hard to get legitimacy in Pakistan through the ballot box or through competent governments, that any new force that comes along, any new voice that comes along, these radical television stations or people who accuse the United States of behind every conspiracy that takes place against Pakistan or against the Islamic world, it's hard for the government to resist that because the government itself doesn't have much legitimacy. The present government was democratically elected, but it hasn't performed very well. So legitimacy in Pakistan is very hard to establish. It's a country that's only had 2 free elections in a 60-year period. So elections are important in terms of giving a government a sense of legitimacy and the right to rule, and of course earning the respect of the population. So I think that Pakistan has been the victim of a negative globalization. Let me look ahead. I'm beginning a project last week, in fact, on what Pakistan will look like the last year of the second Obama administration, if there is a second Obama administration. And what I'm trying to do is get about 15 experts around the world to tell me or sit down with me in a conference center. We could come here, in fact. It'd be a nice place to do it. To say, and I want to ask them to tell me what they think Pakistan will look like 7 years from now. Will it be a whole country? Will it be at war with itself? Will it be a civil war? Will it be a democracy? Will it be a dictatorship? And I have my own views, and I'll lay them out for you now, but I want to check these views against the views of a lot of other people. I think there are 4 major areas where Pakistan is seriously failing. This is a country, again, of 175 million people. By the time we're done here, it might be 180 million people. Very rapid population increase. Despite all efforts by Pakistanis, the economy has been so mismanaged that it's still in shambles. And General Pervez Musharraf, the military dictator of Pakistan, really drove it further into the ground. So the Pakistan economy, that particularly missed the positive side of globalization. It doesn't produce anything other than narcotics and counterfeit guns and maybe towels that anybody wants to buy. If you look at the structure of the economy of a fairly large country, 175 it will be bigger than Russia. There's no real product that they produce except raw materials with the Chinese, which the Chinese are busy digging up in Baluchistan and other provinces. So I think the economy looks like it's going to be, if not flatlined, at least it's not going to grow fast enough to provide increasing demands of Pakistani citizens. Pakistan has also seen for the past 15 years deep sectarian conflict. As you know, Islam is divided between different sects, Sunni, Shias, and others. There's some other sects which are outlawed by most Sunnis in particular. And these sects have been at open warfare in the Pakistani cities and countryside for at least 15 years. And this is not simply an accident. It's largely because the sects, the Shias on the one hand, the Sunnis on another hand, have outside patrons. In the case of Pakistan, there's an Iranian support for Pakistani Shias, and there's Saudi support for Pakistani Sunnis, radical Pakistani Sunnis. I'm not talking about the average Sunni or Shia, but the radicals in each community. So Pakistan has become the battleground, like a Cold War battleground between the Americans and the Soviets, between Saudis, radical Saudis, and radical Iranians. Who support political parties, support groups, and of course carry out assassinations and other attacks on a routine basis. Thirdly, Pakistan has always had a chronic problem of ethnic and regional separatism. When it broke up in 1971, more than half the population left the country. That is East Pakistan, which was almost 100% Bengali, left Pakistan with Indian military assistance. There remained in Pakistan a dominant Punjabi majority, maybe 55% of the population, but they're powerful, significant minorities elsewhere in the country, Pashtuns being one of them, Baluch being another minority, Mahajirs, who were Indian migrants, being another one, and Sindhis being a fourth one. Significant ethnic linguistic minorities. None of those groups like the Punjabis, and the Punjabis have, I don't want to stereotype this too much, but generally the Punjabis have, I would say, disregard or disrespect for the other groups. The army is almost all Punjabi. So when you have the confluence of political power, 55, 60% of the country, and military power, the army, one ethnic group, that means there's going to be an ethnic imbalance and rivalry between the dominant community, Punjabis, and the smaller communities, the Sindhis, Baluch, and others. So this presents a tension, ongoing tension in Pakistani society. It is resolvable. You know, multi-ethnic states have worked it out, India being the best example of this. But Pakistan has had serious problems. Right now, the Baluch are the most troublesome. In a sense, Baluchistan is an open revolt. But Baluchistan, in effect, could be lost to Pakistan if the Taliban succeed there. So, fourthly, there's been incoherence in Pakistan's civil-military relationship. The country has not established a balance between the military and the civilians that works over its 60-year period. There have been periods where the civilians have governed, but they haven't ruled, and the military always behind the throne. Finally, and I think probably the critical factor, and this affects our policy in Afghanistan, is that the Pakistan Army has a vision of itself as leading, I won't say a crusade, but leading a struggle against the West and against its neighbors, and using ethnic minorities and terrorists, put no face on it, as its instrument of policy. The Pakistan Army has supported, trained, operated various groups that have created terror in India, has done the same in Pakistan via the Taliban, and it does this as a matter of statecraft. And all major countries have done this at one time or another. You know, we're not innocent of this ourselves. We've used ethnic minorities or religious minorities around the world against the Soviets, for example. Others have used, say, the Tibetans against the Chinese. We actually did that in the 50s. The Pakistani army does this systematically in the belief that they can bring the Indians down or bring the Indians to negotiate on Kashmir or establish their hegemony in Afghanistan using ethnic or linguistic minorities. I think the army is delusional, frankly, and I've lectured to the Pakistan Defense Academy many times, and I tell them, I said, if you were South Korea, if you had the economy of a South Korea, you could take on Japan, or you could take on America for that matter. You know, you'd be a powerful, dynamic country, culturally homogeneous, and you could take on anybody you wanted. You could take on the Indians, but they're not South Korea, nor are they, say, Japan or Germany. They're a large but failing state. They're more like trying to think of a better analogy. They're more like Egypt. They're trying to take on the Israelis. I think that'd be the best analogy. Egypt tried to take on the Israelis for 15, 20 years and finally gave up and accommodated with Israel. Now, what would Pakistan's future be? Then what are the implications for American policy? Go through several futures. These are discussed in the book, but the Pakistan book. Pakistan could evolve as a democracy. When I wrote the idea of Pakistan in 2003, I gave that a 10% probability. It has become sort of a democracy, but not a real democracy. It could break up, and I would say the probability of that no more than 15, 20%, very low probability, but not impossible. It could become an Islamist radical state. I'd say that's also unlikely. It's most likely to become a Punjabi-dominated authoritarian state, but that would even be unstable. In other words, the future for Pakistan beyond a year or two is hard to predict, but not very promising. So that brings me to policy discussions. Comes to some. Yeah. For the most part, I think two people. The U.S. Senate understood the problem, and the problem in Pakistan was not simply its foreign policy, but its internal incoherence. And the Biden-Lugar bill, now the Kerry-Lugar bill, was dreamt up in the last years of the Bush administration to, in a sense, provide significant economic, educational assistance to Pakistan in the hope of rebuilding and restructuring and normalizing Pakistan. That's what John Hamre was talking about. So Biden-Lugar has embedded in it, I think, the perfect policy. The question is it too late for Pakistan? And the reception given to the Kerry-Lugar bill, the former Biden-Lugar bill, by most Pakistanis was hostile. They didn't want it. So my response to them has been, don't take our money. We'll save our money, and we have strategic alternatives. Then when they think of that, then they come back and say, well, we'll take your money. We're not quite sure what to do with it. So I think part of the policy is in place. $1.5 billion for about 5 years. And the assumption is that might begin to change Pakistan or help Pakistanis change their own society. Personally, I'm skeptical, but politically I support it very much. I think it's worth the effort. Secondly, well, that's the good side, and I can't see any other good side to our relationship. I think we have too many policies towards Pakistan. I count 6 different centers of policy making towards Pakistan, none of which have thought beyond the day after tomorrow. I count Holbrooke, the State Department, the National Security Council, Congress, which of course has 300 policies, the Department of Defense, and CENTCOM, General Petraeus, whose area of responsibility includes Pakistan. So I think part of our problem has been that we still do not have a Pakistan policy. We have a Pakistan policy which is a spin-off of our Afghanistan policy. And that's how the president came to Pakistan. He began with Afghanistan, I think correctly saying that was the biggest show in town. But he used it for political purposes to criticize Bush and the Republicans for having emphasized Iraq. Having done so, he took Pakistan seriously as a factor in Afghanistan, but not so seriously that they're willing to put pressure on Pakistan to stop their support for the Taliban. One of the remarkable things of the McChrystal Report is in 3 or 4 places he says that the Pakistani army is supporting, and the ISI, the intelligence agency, is supporting the Taliban. Why is this the case? Well, for obvious reasons. They think it's in their strategic interest. What will we do about it? We'll give Pakistan money. We'll try to bribe them not to support the Taliban. From a Pakistani point of view, the Taliban are seen, I think incorrectly, as their strategic asset in Afghanistan. So I don't think giving Pakistan money will make much of a difference. On the other hand, we also we're going to provide Pakistan with a lot of military assistance, and that presumably is negotiable. That if they continue to support the Taliban, then the amount of military hardware they get, the amount of military assistance they get, may be reduced. And I would hope that would be our policy. I think another failing of American policy is that we've looked at first AFPAC and now PAC-AF. You know, I'm not quite sure, John, who invented the term AFPAC. My colleague Bruce Rydell was one of the 2 people who did the policy review for President Obama. He hates the term. He finds it just absolutely irritating. Yet all through Washington there are these AFPAC institutes that have sprung up. Bruce says it should be PAC-AF. My view is it should be PAC-PAC, in a sense. Pakistan should be the center of policy. No matter what you have it, which way you have it, looking at Afghanistan and Pakistan is too narrow a focus. Afghanistan is of central interest to India, to Iran, to Russia, as well as to Pakistan. And we've got to broaden out our policy, think of the role India might play in our Afghanistan policy. And we could use India as a lever to pressure the Pakistanis since the Pakistanis are most concerned about Indian presence in Afghanistan, one way to get their attention is to actually work with the Indians to move some of our transit military material through Indian supply routes, which go through Iran into Afghanistan. That may be beyond the pale for this administration because it means working with the Iranians. But we did work with the Iranians right after we cleared the Taliban out of Afghanistan very successfully. So I think that we need to broaden the regional focus, bring in the Chinese. As somebody wrote a column saying, what are we doing in Afghanistan protecting Chinese mining interests? In a sense, the Chinese have a huge mining program in Afghanistan. We're protecting it. Well, you know, I think they should be part of the solution, not simply free riding on our operations in Afghanistan. So I think we need to broaden out the regional perspective. The region isn't AFPAC, and it's not PAC-F, it's not even PAC-PAC. It's South Asia. In a sense, we need to have a broader policy which includes the Iranians, the Indians, and even the Russians, and certainly the Chinese. I think the question is, the big problem I have, and maybe this echoes your concern, John, is it too late? And I'm not going to say yes or no, because I don't know. I told a senior American official in this administration, he did not like the answer. I said, in Afghanistan, I think we can win, because we have the right theory, the right strategy. I'm not sure about the Afghan cooperation, but I think it's winnable. But Pakistan, I wasn't sure. Pakistan, I said, it may be too late, but I said to him, this is an experimental science, not a theoretical science. We have to make one attempt to save Pakistan. And I read to him the passage, the last sentence of my book. I'll read to you. Okay. Before writing Pakistan off as the hopelessly failed state that its critics believe it to be, that's mostly the Indians, Washington may have one last opportunity, triple underline, one opportunity to ensure that this troubled state will not become America's biggest foreign policy problem in the last half of this decade. I wrote this in 2003, published 2004, and I had 2006 as the last half. And they're right on time, the Pakistanis made it. I think that they are our biggest foreign policy problem. Bigger than Iraq. I would disagree with Tom Friedman on his concern about Iraq. Bigger than Afghanistan, although Afghanistan and Pakistan are linked. And unless we get our act together in Pakistan, I think we may have again a year or two to do it, but to see whether there's progress there. I think we're going to have a huge catastrophe in the case of Afghanistan. And I think solving Afghanistan is part of solving the Pakistan problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Very stimulating.